All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this industry information session. I'm so excited to introduce Jessica Barillo, who's going to be talking about Elections Canada and working with them. Before we get started, I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping items and then I'll pass it over to Jessica. As we begin, I want to acknowledge that Mentorability operates on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples in what is colonially called Alberta and express gratitude and respect for the land that we use. I personally am coming from Edmonton, also known as Amiskwaciwâskagan, and I would invite all of you to think about and reflect on the land that you're coming from and your own relationship to the land. On our decolonial journey, we pledge to dismantle systemic racism within our organization and commit to advancing reconciliation and equitable partnerships as we continue to engage predominantly in Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 territories and the Métis homeland. We recognize that acknowledgement of traditional land is a start, but what is being asked for by Indigenous communities is land back. A little bit of housekeeping. So if you are not talking, please keep yourself muted so that we don't get any background noise and everybody's able to hear as best as possible. If you have any questions, please feel free to stick them in the chat, raise your hand either with the little reaction or just raise your hand in the video. I'll be keeping an eye out for that. Jessica is welcoming questions throughout the presentation, so you can feel free to hold them till the end or just put your hand up and ask in the middle of whatever Jessica's saying so that you can get that answer right away. If you require any help with the closed captioning, if you go down to the bottom line of your Zoom there's a more button that you can turn the captions on or off. If you're having any issues, feel free to send me a message and I can help with any way that I can. And then finally, just a little bit about Mentorability Alberta. We are part of a national initiative that helps to facilitate short-term mentorship opportunities for people who experience pan disability. And we do this so that folks can gain understanding, connections, and really learning a deeper understanding of that day-to-day reality of the career path that they're interested in, with setting up short-term mentorship matches with people who are in the industries that they're interested in working in. So if you have any questions about Mentorability Alberta, feel free to connect with me. At the end of, after this presentation, we'll send out an email with our feedback survey as well as more information about Mentorability. So if you have any questions, you can always reply to that email and it will come directly to me. So that's everything I have. So I'm so happy to pass it over to Jessica Barillo. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so that she can share hers. And take it away, Jessica.
Thanks so much. So of course I'm multitasking while I'm sharing my screen here. Here we are. There we go. Everything look okay to you, Jamie?
Looks good.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for having me here today. My name is Jessica Barillo. I am also tuning in from Edmonton, so I think I'm close by to a lot of you folks. And I come from Elections Canada on the Inspire Democracy team. I will talk a little bit more about what that means in a moment, but first we'll get into it. By the end of this session, I'll be going over all of the programs and tools in place to help folks just like you work at the polls or communicate to people you know about how to work at the polls in general federal elections. So by the end of this session, I hope you will understand all of the paid positions that election workers have, and especially some of the most common ones during a federal election. I hope that you will have all the information you need to confidently apply for election worker jobs and understand some of the special tools that are in place for people with disabilities in particular. On our agenda I will go over the Inspire Democracy program, exactly what that means, who we are, what we're doing, where we are, how we are. I'm good. The available jobs for federal elections, the application process, some of the electoral safeguards that are in place to ensure that Canada maintains the integrity in our elections, and of course, the overall conclusion. I do have a bit of an icebreaker activity. So, since our group is a little bit bigger today, if you would like to participate, I will invite you all to write in the chat. So, my question for you is, where are you tuning in from? And what is your interest in this information today? So, for example, my name is Jessica Barillo. I'm tuning in from Edmonton. And this information is really important to me because, as a person with a disability myself, I want to see representation of people with disabilities in all aspects of life, including working at the polls in general elections. So I will allow some folks to contribute to the chat, who you are, where you're tuning in from, and why this is of interest to you today.
So just respond in the chat. Sorry, I got confused.
Oh, yes, the chat's fine. Though, if you're feeling brave and you want to put up your hand too, that's all right. And of course, I'll be relying a little bit on Jamie because while I'm sharing my screen, I unfortunately can't see too much of anything.
So we have one in the chat here from Derek. My name is Derek Wang. I am tuning in from Edmonton, and I just want to gain some experience because this is for my career later on. And then we have Mike with his hand up. You want to be brave, Mike, and let us know?
Yes, I'm going to be brave. So my name is Mike Wing. I am tuning in from Edmonton, Alberta. And my interest is kind of twofold. I actually participated as a scrutineer in the Alberta election during the last one, and I didn't have a very good experience. So I'm really interested to know like what kind of accommodations are in place and what kind of accessibility is in place for folks. So thank you.
Yeah, awesome, Mike. And then we have some other folks. So Elaine is interested in working in the polls. Jackie is in Edmonton and as a person with a disability, wants to make disabilities known to the public. We have Louise Riley from Calgary here to find out more information for their students with disabilities at IPSI, U of C, SAIT, and St. Mary's. Kayla is a job coach in Calgary for autistic adults and youth, tuning in to see if there's any information that she can pass along to participants. Uh, Dina from Edmonton works with people with disabilities and would like to connect them with possible job opportunities. And Jackie is interested in working in the polls too. And then we have Paul, who is a vocational counselor with Inclusion Chilliwack Society. And
Oh,
that's it.
wonderful. I'm really putting you to work, Jamie. I thought you probably thought you were just going to be sitting on the wayside making sure nothing went wrong, but here I'm putting you to work. Thank you.
No
Welcome,
problem.
everybody. Thank you for sharing that. I will absolutely make sure I go over how to work at the polls. If you are a person with a disability and interested in accommodations, how to go through that process. And for folks that work in the industry and have clients and other folks that you serve, we can also connect to and make sure that you have lots of information after this as well. So thank you all. All righty, so we're going to start off with a trivia question to set the stage. So you can either think about this in your head, or if you're feeling brave and want to put a guess in the chat, you can as well. So, what is a common barrier to electoral participation experienced by people with disabilities? Is it a feeling of not knowing enough to participate? B, dealing with a lengthy list of acceptable IDs? C, not understanding voting options, or D, all of the above? What do we think? You can throw some answers in the chat or give it a think, and I'll give it a moment before I spoil the fun and tell you the answer.
We've got a couple of D's and an A so far in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So if you were typing or if you were thinking all of the above, that's what we know. So I work on a team called Inspire Democracy, and this means that my team is specific within Elections Canada in barrier reduction, not just for people with disabilities, but also for Indigenous electors, electors experiencing homelessness, new Canadians, and youth. So we have a really robust research team that looks at exactly who is experiencing exactly what kind of barriers when it comes to electoral participation. This includes working at the polls, but it also includes voting and running as a candidate should people choose to do so. We also have a robust consultations team that works with people with disabilities as well as organizations who work with people with disabilities to get a really good sense. And so we know that there are many barriers, not just some of the ones that pertain directly to accommodations, but also informational barriers, not sure where to go, what are the first steps, how to participate, etc. So then there's my portion of the team, and I'm here primarily for those informational barriers, ensuring that you know exactly what is available to you so that you can participate in the electoral process. So to set the stage, I'm going to play this video. This is Corey Earl. He is a person with a disability, and he has worked many, many elections with us. He has started all the way from an introductory worker to eventually a poll manager. So we'll listen to what he has to say about his experience.
Being a supervisor, and again, I've had an opportunity to experience all positions over the course of since I was 18. Starting off as a poll clerk and then registration information officer. So I really got to experience all the roles before coming to supervisor. And part of what I see as a role, certainly as a supervisor, my job was to oversee the poll station, make sure everything went smoothly. Making sure that the process was fair, transparent, making sure that we got feedback from electors, because that was extremely important to help improve on how we move forward. To get workers ready and prepared for the day. Just because the election happens that day, it's also really important in my role was to connect with the election workers prior to that. And also supporting the workers. It's really important. It's the job, especially as a supervisor that day, was to support the workers, making sure that they were okay. And it was really important for me to know what all responsibilities were included. And so my job would be to cover the break shifts for them as well, from registration to being at the polling station, and then also the other component was to deal with any complaints, deal with any concerns for electors, whether it's be if their voter registration, ID, but also making sure that they came in, that they knew that they would be well supported. And so that was my job, and to report any concerns to my supervisor that may have occurred during that moment or during that day. And also making sure that when electors came in, that their well-being was also met as well, making sure that, whether someone, especially people with disabilities, when they're waiting in a lineup, do we need to make sure we have chairs in the lineup? Do we need to make sure that they have the support that they need as well? And also making sure that the election workers also have the tools as well that day as well. I truly do believe in democracy, and I truly do believe we have a responsibility, especially for generations such as me, for generations that are going to be impacted, to engage. And part of me was, how can I help my community and make a difference? How can I support and build a great team? it's really important that we have more training on accessibility and supporting people with disabilities. It's really important that while we're having accessible training, that they're actually led by people with disabilities. I think people with intellectual developmental disabilities or the invisible disabilities as well, really important for them to be involved and engaged. And finally, making sure that all materials are plain language. As a poll worker, they will tell you the plain language aspect will have a huge impact on them as well. So really having that training opportunity, because that training is vital, especially whether it's people working the schools or election day. They need to have adequate training that's not rushed on supporting people with disabilities or accessibility. It's that they have the appropriate training that will guide them. I really encourage people to get involved and really work election. And it would be really great to see more people with disabilities to really get involved in that aspect. People just have to remember that when you're working election, it's not it's we as a team. I will continue to put my name forward for elections. And in fact, I was called not so long ago to work the next election. So just in case, so there is one. So they're already on top of that. And I've agreed to do it, continuing on. So.
All right, so we'll move into another trivia question. And I haven't said the answer to this yet one either. So we'll put our thinking caps on. True or false, working as a poll worker is a paid position? So feel free to think about it to yourself, or if you're feeling brave and want to put it in the chat, you can take a guess as well.
We've got overwhelmingly true responses in the chat.
Ooh, and I love to hear it. That is correct. It is true. Working as a poll worker is a paid position. And we know that actually one of the more common misconceptions is folks think it's a volunteer position. So I'm here to tell you that it is in fact true, although I'm preaching to the choir. You already knew this. How about training? True or false? You are paid to attend training as a poll worker. What do we think?
A little bit slower coming in the chat.
Mm-hmm,
looks like true. True's have it.
Yes, because if after that it was false, that would be pretty mean, wouldn't it? But yes, training is also paid when you work at the polls. And I will say that it's not even minimum wage, that it is a good step higher than minimum wage when it comes to working at the polls, including training. But why? Why work at the federal election? So besides getting paid to do it, which we've covered, you also get to help support Canada's democracy. So this is a great way of a special interest to you, or you feel particularly called to contribute to this cause, it's a great way to get involved. You get to meet a lot of new people, a lot of which share similar values to you in contributing to this cause. It's also a great way to learn new skills. So I remember that one of you said that you see this as a means to get experience for your future career, and it's a fabulous way to build a resume. You don't need to have any experience to work for the polls in a federal election. And so this is a great way to gain some of those skills for future endeavors. But in general, when an election is called, we become the largest employer in the country. So any other time, Elections Canada has about 500 workers. But when they call the election, we become 200,000 people strong. And it's very important to Elections Canada that our poll workers reflect the diversity of the people who are coming to the polls. So it's really important for us to have people with disabilities representing Canadians in that way. I have another video. So let's go ahead and take a peek, shall we?
Federal election. Work as a poll worker. Elections Canada hires more than 200,000 Canadians across Canada to work on advance polling days and election day. A variety of paid positions are available in an environment with safety measures in place, and training is provided. To work at the federal election, you must be a Canadian citizen, at least 16 years old on election day, and remain nonpartisan during your employment. Weekend shifts are also available for those looking for a flexible work schedule. To learn more about the health and safety measures we're taking to protect workers and to apply online, visit elections.ca/jobs. Make a valuable contribution to democracy as a poll worker. Visit elections.ca for the official information on voting and the health and safety measures in place, or call 1-800-463-6868, TTY 1-800-361-8935.
Alrighty, so one of the things that they mentioned in the video actually addresses a question I had submitted to me in advance. And the question was, do you need to be a Canadian citizen to work at the polls? And the answer to that is yes. But you also may have noticed that the age requirement is only 16. This is often surprising to folks because you need to be 18 to vote in a federal election. That being said, we love having folks who are 16 and 17 work for elections. It's also great to see youth represented at the polls. Another thing they mentioned that I want to touch on is if you work for the polls during that period, you have to remain nonpartisan. So this means that you don't have one particular bias that you show towards one party or another. So this can look like you can't say post on your social media who you are voting for or how you feel about a particular politician, right down to you can't wear any colors at the polls that are party colors, as in no red or blue or purple or orange. And this is true for me too, as I go about my job. I wear a lot of black, a lot of gray. I will also, in addition to touching upon the requirements to work at that polls, that age requirement and that citizenship requirement, there is also a list of folks who are not allowed to work at the polls. So this would be any federal ministers, if you're a senator, if you're currently sitting in the House of Commons, particular judges, those sort of positions. Or if you've ever been convicted of any election-related crimes. So let's say you got caught trying to vote twice in even a provincial election, then you would not be eligible to work. Are there any questions about any of this so far?
I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but I have a question, Jessica. What
Sure.
if somebody is, a staunch NDPer or something like that, and so they have a history on their social media of, cheering on NDP, but during the election time period, they don't. Is that okay?
Yeah, so it would probably mean that during the election, you would be asked to make your social media private and hide some of those posts. But then outside of the election, you'd be allowed to resume your activities. This also means that for the federal election, you wouldn't be allowed to financially contribute to certain parties because those end up being a public record as well. And I get asked about this a lot. It's one of the more common questions when I tell people, like, oh, I work for Elections Canada. And I will often be asked, like, oh, don't you feel like you're giving up something? Because folks who tend to want to participate in elections have that interest in politics. So, one, you're still allowed to have political discussions. So, you're still allowed to talk about rights for people with disabilities, for example. You just can't tie it back to particular parties. But this comes down to some content that I actually think is it's such a flex for the Canadian electoral system. And that is, we are not the government. It is not the people who are in power who are running and planning the elections. And that ends up contributing to the overall integrity and safety of Canadian elections. And so, while on one hand, at times I might feel like I'm giving something up, that I can't openly discuss my party leanings, but on the other hand, I feel like I'm contributing to capital D democracy. Very patriotic. This is where if I had special effects, there would be a Canada flag flowing behind me on your screen right now. Does that answer your question, Jamie? I ad-lib it a lot, but did that answer your
absolutely.
question, Jamie?
Thank you.
All righty.
Federal
Oops.
election.
No, we don't want to listen to that again. So, as I mentioned, training is paid, and it usually takes place either in the riding where you work, or excuse me, where you will work, which is typically either the riding where you live or sometimes a neighboring riding, or these days it actually occurs online very often. So, training will be a mixture of either modules, online videos, manuals, but either way, you end up working with the returning officer, and this is the person who sets up the polls. And they, as an individual, start to address accommodations when it comes to any help you may need in learning materials. There's also the option of taking extra long time to go through the training too, if you require that in order to feel comfortable on election day. So there's the possibility of it occurring in many different formats. There's also different locations where you may end up working if you work at the polls. So, one of the most common locations is you see in the middle there, which is a polling place. So, this would be on election day or on advanced polling days where folks go to vote. That is the most common place where most of the workers end up. But there's other opportunities as well. So, for example, in every single district or riding across the country during the election, a pop-up office comes up for Elections Canada. This is where the returning officer works with their staff to do all of the side operational tasks to make sure that the polling places can run smoothly. And now I like to mention this because sometimes polling places can be a little bit busy or have longer shifts, or they can be more sensory dense environment where, and if that's something that doesn't end up working well with, say, your disability or your preferences, a local Elections Canada office can offer, say, a quieter environment. There's more accommodations for different lengths in your shift or how you take your breaks. And there's different kind of tasks that aren't done face to face with the public. So sometimes there can be a little less pressure with that. So I like to mention that that's a great option too. And then there are third, like tertiary locations. Here it says the Vote on Campus office, but I would like to expand that it would be any mobile polling station. So this might be on campuses for students to vote. It also might be at local hospitals for folks who are in hospital to vote while they're there. Or, for example, I attended a by-election in Winnipeg this fall, and I was stationed at a long-term seniors facility. And so very different vibes. And I like to mention this too, because that can also be accessible in ways that, say, a polling place is not, but then also inaccessible in ways that a polling place is. So, for example, you need to be more mobile, and so when you're at the mobile polls, but it offers different kind of environments. And I mention all of this because when I talk about the accommodation process when you're hired, you can know that there's lots of different options. So if I say anything today like, oh, shifts typically look like this or typically require that, and you're thinking, oh, I don't know if that's going to work with my disability or with my clients who have disabilities, there's always conversations that can be had and lots of different options. Okay, but enough of me yammering on. Let's go into the next trivia question. Who is, oh, I've even given you the answer to this one, so maybe it's a test to see if you're listening. Who is responsible for overseeing all operations of an election in a riding or electoral district? Is it A, the field liaison officer slash float, B, the returning officer slash RO, C, the community relations officer slash CRO, or D, the operations manager slash OM? I don't know. I'm not sure if I've heard that one said out loud. Any guesses coming in, Jamie?
Let's see. We have ROOMFLO. They're all over the place, Jessica.
Cool. Well, I'll put you out of your misery and I'll tell you the answer. It is B, the returning officer. So, the returning officer, there is one for every single electoral district or riding across the country. So, there's 343 of them, and they are responsible for setting up the polls, choosing the polling locations, hiring all the staff, training all the staff. They are the head honcho in that area. So, it's the returning officer. So we chatted about how some jobs may occur at the returning officer's office. So one of the nice things about this job is that once the election is called, the office is ready to go all the way until election day. So typically once an election is called, there's anywhere from 36 to 50 days before election day. So some of these positions can occur for the entirety of that time leading up to election day. The hours can fluctuate anywhere from 7.5 up to 12 hours, and they can be evenings, it might be weekends, it might be during the day. Though remember, when I talk about the accommodation process, one great conversation to have is if that's a long day for you, accommodations can be available. And at these offices, you would be preparing everything that people need to vote. So this might be that you help the returning officer find those polling locations. This might mean that you assemble a whole bunch of ballot boxes. This might mean that you are answering phones if folks are calling with questions. There's lots of different kinds of jobs that occur at that location. Now, I also want to chat about the community relations officer. So this was one of the other choices in that last trivia question I gave you. And the reason why I mention it is because I think particularly people in the session might find this job interesting, or they might have special skills that they bring to it. So essentially, a community relations officer, there's one in every riding, just like the returning officer, and their role is to provide information on registering and voting and help break down those barriers to electoral participation. So where my team does that at a national level and for head office, the CROW, the Community Relations Officer, they are on the ground doing that in each and every electoral district or riding. So if this is somewhere where you have learned experience, lived experience, relationships and friends, and information about your community that can help the returning officer break down those barriers, then that's just wonderful, because then all of a sudden we have more people with disabilities voting, we have more people with disabilities working at the polls. And I will mention all of the potential jobs are listed on our website. And after this, I will be sending Jamie a whole sheet of links with additional information. So you also, if you want to know more about each position, you'll be able to read all the duties. So then if you have a particular one in mind or one that's of particular interest to you, then when I talk about how to apply and talk to the returning officer about accommodations, that might inform some of your conversations with them. All right. So we talked about how most jobs occur at the polling place. So you have, say, an information officer. This is a great starter position if you're just looking to build your experience, or if you're not sure if you have special skills to contribute to this at this time. An information officer works at the opening or the doors of the polling station, and it helps people access the polling station. It ensures that they have all the information they need to vote that day, helps them make sure they're in the right location, and just the friendly face to make sure that everyone's feeling really welcome that day. But we also have registration officers to help people register to vote if they aren't already. You might be one of the poll supervisors, so making sure that all the breaks are covered, everyone has everything they need. They have their ballots, they have their pencils, they have their lunches, they're not wearing those party colors, those sort of tasks. And then for the mobile polls, there's a lot of the same positions that you would see at polling stations, just they occur in more bite-sized hunks. So for example, when I observed at the seniors facility in the by-election in Winnipeg this fall, it was a 4-hour time slot that that polling station was open. So with a little bit of setup and a little bit of takedown, a lot of the similar positions, but in smaller sections, which is why it might be a good choice if long days might be challenging for you or inaccessible. All right. So now I hope you're excited and you're thinking, I'm ready to apply. The first piece of good news I have for you, well, I guess I'll just say news. You might take this news in different ways, but while our next federal election must occur before October of next year, there's a pretty good chance that the election will be called early. We never really know. We don't tend to have much more insider information compared to, say, you if you're watching the news. But I can tell you that already all of our returning officers have been hired, and they are already starting the process of setting up the polls. So this means that if you're thinking about applying to work at the polls, don't wait. I would encourage you to do it today if you can. You don't necessarily have to wait until the election is called. So, but here's how you'll do it. You'll go to elections.ca, and right on the front page, it says apply for jobs. And I'll show you a screenshot in a moment of what that looks like. And then once the election is called, you would be contacted. And I will actually, let's back up. When you apply to, actually, I'm changing my mind all the time, and I'm sure you can tell. I will talk about the application process on the website on the next slide when I have the screenshot. But then, so they contact you when the election is called, and this is when they'll go through your accommodation information that I hope you put in the form. And they will conduct either a phone interview, or if you need another means of having an interview, you can. And I will say that these interviews are at the discretion of the returning officer. And so this is good news because it means if you've requested accommodations as a person with a disability, then they have a lot of freedom to be able to conduct that interview in a myriad of methods, and also in different ways to help see if you would be a good fit for the polls and if the polls would be a good fit for you. Then you get assigned to your training sessions and the polling location. So we talked about the training session, lots of different formats, and the polling location. You either tend to be assigned to the polling location where you live or a neighboring polling location. And there's often a bit of flexibility if you have requests there too. And then you sign your solemn declaration. So this is where you declare that you will be nonpartisan for the election, for example. You declare that you will uphold the integrity of the election as best as you can based on all the training that you have. And it also means that if folks need help marking their ballots or help voting, that you're in a position where you're able to do that while still keeping their vote a secret. And then you're ready to work. But I want to break down that how to apply thing, like I said here. So when you go to elections.ca, here's what it will look like. And up across the top there, it says employment, and it will say current job opportunities. And you'll scroll down to poll workers. And that will bring up a form where you'll be asked to put in your information. You don't have to put up a resume, but one thing that I would absolutely encourage every single person and their dog to use, except for not your dog, because I didn't specifically say this, your dog is not eligible to work at the polls, though I wish we'd get a much higher voter turnout if they were. But there's an accommodations box. And this is an opportunity for you to put in whatever information you would like to share. You do not need to have a formal diagnosis. You do not need to declare any medical history or medical specifics. But this is an opportunity to either say put in a small amount of information like, I might require some accommodations and I'm new to this. And can I please have a conversation with the returning officer? Or it might mean that you've read all of the job postings and you have a really good idea of what you want your accommodations to be, or what might be inaccessible, what is accessible, and you can put that information in there. This is then up to the discretion so that when they see that information, they can have a conversation with you.
Jessica,
All right.
if
Yes.
I can ask, we have a question. So obviously it sounds like, elections.ca really, really wants folks with disabilities to be applying. And you can mention your accommodations right in that process. But we have a question. The person who trains people for working at the polls, will they know if somebody has a disability?
So the trainers, I guess So it depends here. They won't necessarily know if it's a disability, because if you do end up choosing to share that you are a person with a disability or share specific medical information with the returning officer, they are not in turn going to share that potentially sensitive information to the trainer. In some cases, the returning officer is the trainer. So in that case, they will know because it's the same person. But if it's a different person training, they will end up knowing the accommodations and the tools and techniques in that instance, but not necessarily that specific information. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, sounds like. Thank you so much.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. All righty. Now, I also want to touch upon electoral safeguards. So, this is all of the security that's in place when it comes to maintaining the integrity of Canadian elections. And a lot of this comes down to the people who work at the polls. Canada is an incredibly safe and secure place to vote. And a lot of that is thanks to folks like you who will hopefully end up working at the polls. So, one thing that election workers do that's incredibly important to this security is making sure that people are eligible to vote. So, ensuring that they're either registered, that they have the proper ID, or helping them register if they need to. You also keep track of who has already voted through a system that's in place so that they then can't, say, go to another location and try to vote a second time somewhere else. You will update voter registrations. There we go. You will also guard voters' privacy. So we have some programs in place that help folks that need additional help to mark their ballot. And election workers are capable of doing that. And in that case, you ensure that later on, you're not then going to say, oh, I saw so and so at the poll today and they voted for so and so. Mm-mm. And then you also help make sure that the election workers are impartial. Oops, I don't know what I did. Here we are. So, next trivia question. True or false? Ballots are electronically counted. I know this is a hot button topic in Alberta right now.
It looks like we have one true. Oh, a false and a true. True.
Mm.
True.
So, in federal elections, ballots are not electronically counted. They are counted by hand. And this is done in a really specific way where folks open the box. They can be viewed by anyone in the room. No, I'm sorry. I got a note that my computer's charging, and my partner was like, "Quick, bring me my charger." Thank you. And you're watched by everyone in the room. So one by one, you pull the ballot out, you say the name of who it is, you show everyone in the room, and then there's a team of people that are all marking down the tally. At the end of the night, those tallies have to equal each other, and they also have to equal the amount of people who voted that day to ensure that there's not an additional ballot in there or there's not a ballot that wasn't counted. It's a really cool process. I got to view it as well when I was at the by-election in Winnipeg. And that way it kind of bypasses any sort of technological difficulties in that sense. All right. So I talked a little bit about how the votes are counted. There's also contingency measures in place. So once the votes are counted, they're reported to head office, and we have contingency measures in place if there are floods, if there's no internet, if there's a fire in the building. Every single outcome has been accounted for to ensure that those votes get to head office. And if everything, though we publish a preliminary response, often within a matter of a few hours, once all the polling locations are closed, if there's any security concerns, if any of these numbers do not add up, then over the course of about 3 months after the election, set and authorized people, because there's recording at each step of the voting process, they can often find, okay, where did this discrepancy come from? So a little known fact is the official results of an election are actually not typically ready for like 2 to 3 months afterwards. Alrighty. So this brings us to the end of the presentation. I'm happy to, in a moment here, I will stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody for questions. But if you're interested in telling me what you think, please scan this QR code and that way you can let me know. What did you think? Was it awful? I want to know because I'm always trying to make these presentations better. So thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you now. Here we go. Stop share. Hello. All right. So with the last couple of moments that we're here together, I'm open if there are any other questions, anything on anyone's mind after that presentation.
What questions do folks have?
All good. I know we were taking questions throughout too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my email in the chat as well, because I know sometimes it can be intimidating to ask questions in the setting, or you might think about this later and want to email me. Oh, I see a question. Are there any way non-citizens contribute to help elections run smoothly? That's a really good question. So when it comes to like being an official worker at the polls, you do have to be a Canadian citizen in order to do that. That being said, I know that different parties allow for volunteers and scrutineers, for example, to volunteer for political parties. I'm obviously not allowed to chat about that in too great a detail for fear of not being partisan at the end of it. But that's another way to get involved in elections. But another way is, now that you know this information, spread the word. You don't need to be a Canadian citizen to help folks around you know what they need to know to get involved. And I actually think that that is one of the most powerful things you can do. That if you have people in your life that are like, oh, I can't vote at the polls, but you're like, oh, I know about mail-in voting, then chatting with them about that, or getting the people around you excited to work at the polls if they are able to, or to run as candidates if they are able to. I think that that's ultimately makes a really big difference, especially when it comes to people who experience barriers. Are you more likely to be hired if you have worked for Elections Canada in the past? So yes, if you do end up having experience to work at the polls, then they will often, some of those more like advanced managerial poll working positions, that really helps to move into some of those positions. But I will reiterate that you don't have to have any experience to work at the polls. Not any kind, like if this is your first ever job, that still is a-okay. We really love to have that diversity, and you can still make a really meaningful difference. Perfect. Cool. And now you have my email. And also, so not just if you need more information for yourself, reach out for sure. But I know we have folks from different organizations here too that work with people with disabilities. I'm in Edmonton and I do these presentations all the time. I also have lots of print materials that are in Braille, that are in large print. They're all plain language, audio CD, as well as 50 different languages, including 20 Indigenous languages that I can ship to you for free. So do feel free to reach out if you would like any kind of additional information, or if you think any of these sessions would be valuable to your organizations as well. Jamie did not make me sign a non-compete.
Absolutely welcome to have Jessica share with anybody. If you have any questions, want to get in touch with Jessica, I know she put her email address in there, but if you forget or if you write it down wrong, please reach out to me. I'm happy to make an introduction. Jessica, we did have another question in here. Would an accommodation of having a support person with an individual be considered for the training and or for the work as well?
Absolutely, yes. I've seen it happen. It's awesome. Support people are absolutely welcome through the training and on the polls. And I saw another question come in. Are you able to apply as a poll worker in communities other than your own? So yes, you are, although something to consider logistically too, because if you're working at the polls on the election day, then it might not be easy for you to get to your assigned polling station to vote. So you might have to move around. Or the advanced polls, there's less advanced polling stations than polling stations on election day. So if you work the advance polls, that might be a little bit farther away from home. But yes, you don't need to live in the community that you work in. All
Awesome.
right.
Those are all the
Thanks for all the
questions that I see, Jessica. Sorry to cut you
Wonderful. Well,
off
I
there.
super no, it's okay. We're all just saying lovely things. I definitely appreciate everyone's participation today. I hope to hear from you if you have more questions. But yeah, thank you so much. And I want to see all of you working at the polls. I think that would be the best.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, everybody, for coming today and listening to Jessica and asking those great questions, participating in the presentation as well. Jessica, we really appreciate you coming. I did receive some feedback already that your presentation was great. You were very clear and talking at a good listening volume, which is very important to some of the folks here. So thank you for that. Very much appreciated.
Wonderful. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. That is our last presentation for Industry Information Sessions of 2024. Please stay tuned for 2025. We've already got a few in the works. You'll always be able to find that information on our Eventbrite page, and we generally send out to Mentorability participants events that are coming up. So I hope that everybody has a safe and healthy and happy holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2025. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, folks. Take care. Thank you.